Lost Chord, reaching out to people struggling with dementia. It's a charity established in 1999 in an attempt to help improve the quality of life of those struggling to live with dementia. We use highly trained professional musicians, and in fact there are 2 Lost Chord musicians here this evening, soprano Debbie Norman and accordionist Luke Carvagos, and perhaps you'd like to stand because it might be that, sorry Debbie, it might be that people would like to have a word with you afterwards. Debbie and Luke. Okay. I'm sure they can tell you far better than I can. Using a variety of musical instruments and styles to help stimulate responses, in particular for those who can't walk, talk, feed themselves, or communicate in any way. And we have achieved some amazing responses. And the last 16 years have been an exciting journey of discovery into dementia. It's been a huge learning curve for us all. And those variety of instruments would obviously include something like this. Stephen had just shown Elsie how to hold the cello. She'd never seen a cello before in her life. And doesn't she look comfortable with it? And actually, she didn't sound that bad. To be perfectly honest, she really, well, you can see how proud she was of herself, being able to play a few notes on the cello. And similarly with Mary on the viola, can I tell you, my son got to grade 5 on violin. And she sounded infinitely better than he ever did. And she just picked it up. So, you know, there we are. Now, this is another Stephen. Stephen is a phenomenal pianist. And he just seems to be able to compose a piece of music out of thin air. And he asked this little lady to come and sit with him and to plonk on the black notes. You can see her with her right hand plonking on the black notes. And around that plonking, he produced the most beautiful piece of music. Let me tell you, the self-esteem in that room was on the ceiling. It was incredible. Not only did she feel fantastic, but somehow all the other people in the room felt part of it, and their self-esteem was floating on midair. Why Lost Chord exists? Well, we did get some initial funding in 1999 from Henry Smith's charity for a 3-year pilot scheme. And we started then with just 10 social services homes. Henry Smith wanted to spend some money in the north of England and sort out particular projects, and fortunately we were one of them. But now we visit more than 130 homes, and that's not with going out, that's with people coming to us and saying, please come to our home. So 130 homes and day centres on a regular monthly basis, affecting the lives of more than 2,000 people with dementia every month. It's quite incredible. And each month we build on the responses that we've achieved in previous successive sessions. So we go to the same homes each month. Homes that are not only in South Yorkshire, but in London, Cardiff, Coventry, Bury St Edmunds, and Ipswich. And if we had enough money, we could cover the country. But here we are. This is in Coventry. And this little lady was confined to a wheelchair. I don't know whether you can see that quite well there, but she couldn't walk at all, really, but very chatty and lovely big beaming smile. The gentleman sat next to her. He could just about weight bear, and the carers had got him up to dance, and they were swaying with him. He always wore his flat cap, by the way, never took it off. In fact, it was there until he got into bed at night, and when he fell fast asleep, the carers would take it off his head, and then the next morning it would be back on again. We put him back down again, and she leaned over as though she'd never seen him before and said, "Are you married?" Well, bless him, he sat there, and as I said, this is a gentleman who could weight bear but very little conversation. And he sat there and he thought for a while, and then he said, "No." "Oh, well, it's all right then," she said. What was all right, I really don't know, but there we are. But she reminded me of Hilda. Now, Hilda I met all those years ago in 1999, and Hilda has always been my favourite. She was confined to a wheelchair. She couldn't move much at all. The only thing she could move was her right arm. And when Hilda was excited or Hilda was enjoying something, like an excited little child, her right arm would float into the air. So we always knew when she was enjoying herself. And she always had a big beaming smile on her face. I think that's why she was my favourite. And about a couple of years ago, I lost Hilda. She wasn't in the home when I visited. 2 or 3 months ago, we were asked on a Friday afternoon, when the musicians had done 13 sessions, to go into some of the rooms where people had probably been confined to their beds 18 months, maybe. And the first room we went into, I was with an oboist at the time, there was Hilda. And Hilda was lying on a bed, bag of bones, bless her, practically in the fetal position. And if you actually die of dementia, which is very rare, you go right back into the fetal position. And I went up to Hilda and I fought back the tears and I said, "Oh, Hilda, I haven't seen you in months and months and months. I brought a musician to play some music for you." And the oboist likewise fought back the tears. And she started to play Gabriel's oboe. Beautiful piece of music. And quite suddenly, Hilda's right arm floated into the air. Well, the carer ran out in tears. She said to me afterwards, "I haven't seen Hilda do that in months and months and months." And when people say to me, "You're wasting your time," they don't even know you are there. I know they're wrong. Because of Hilda, I know they're wrong. She knew we were there, and she was able to tell us, because of this, that she was enjoying her music. And I use her always as a shining example of what Lost Chord and music can achieve. And our understanding of the impact of music on people with dementia, we're all aware we've got 2 sides to the brain. The left-hand side of the brain I'm using at the moment, maybe not that efficiently, but speech, original thought, short-term memory. And the right-hand side of the brain deals with music, song, learning things in long-term memory, poetry, that sort of thing, rhythm. Now, I never know, but for whatever reason, and there seems to be no explanation, but I'm sure one day somebody will explain to me why, with the onset of dementia, the left-hand side of the brain appears to deteriorate first. So it's short-term memory that is a thing that people pick up on. But of course, speech goes, etc. Therefore, when the ability to speak coherently has practically died off, there's still a distinct possibility that the right-hand side of the brain is still intact. And that's what we use with Lost Chord, obviously. What we're trying to do is, with the music, to keep that right-hand side of the brain stimulated and working for as long as we possibly can. She must have thought all her Christmases had come at once, that lovely baritone singing to her and dancing with her. But I must tell you about the Thompson sisters, because we get often students from universities studying music therapy ringing us up and saying, can I come and sit in on a session? And this was a particular student from York University who came along, and she rang me. I couldn't orchestrate which session that she could sit in on, because we had to work it around her studies and the train times. And I picked her up from Sheffield Station and we dashed off to a little residential home just off the Parkway. And we arrived just as the session had started, and the soprano and the pianist were weaving their magic spell, and everybody was joining in, all except Dorothy. Now, Dorothy, that morning, was in a real mood. Let me tell you, expletives were floating round the room, and I was at the breath end of most of it. And suddenly, the pianist started to play some war songs. And Dorothy took to her feet. She had the most beautiful voice, and she started to join in with the war songs. And it transpired that Dorothy was one of the Thompson sisters playing to the troops during the war. Now, I didn't know the Thompson sisters from Adam, but, she said, my sister Marjorie is sat over there in the corner, the other Thompson sister. And I thought, wow. We'd all tried with Marjorie, but Marjorie spent her whole life in the residential home like that, with a head under a cardigan. She never came out. And Dorothy said, you're wasting your time with Marjorie. She hasn't spoken to me since she came into this home. So I went up to Marjorie and I got right down with my head under the cardigan. And I said, Marjorie, I didn't realize you were one of the Thompson sisters playing to the troops during the war. And quite suddenly, Marjorie came out from under a cardigan. She got the most fantastic blue eyes and a shock of red hair. She must have been a real cracker when she was younger. And she said, how do you know? And I said, because Dorothy's just told me. And I'm sure you know the song that she's singing. And of course, at that moment, Dorothy was singing The White Cliffs of Dover with the soprano. Well, the two of them got up and stood together after all those years and sang The White Cliffs of Dover. Well, let me tell you, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. I was in tears, the soprano was in tears, the pianist was in tears, the carers were in tears, and the little girl from York University, she just couldn't believe her eyes. And as I said before, we couldn't have orchestrated that. Oh, and Lawrence. Lawrence was tall, distinguished, grey-haired man, attractive. I couldn't believe it on his first day when he was being admitted into a very severe unit. And his relatives were with him. And he sat down, and within a short space of time, the relatives left. And I was just so upset because Lawrence sat there staring into space. But we were talking this morning on Radio Sheffield about a particular piece of music that is so important to us, that brings back memories, that stimulates us, that does that. Hairs on the back of your neck. The Gabriel's oboe is the one that does it for me. And the one that did it for him was I Do Like to Be Beside the Seaside. And as soon as that started, it just came to life. It was quite incredible. He made eye contact, he was singing along with the songs. As you can see, we actually got him up dancing. And when it came to the percussion, handing round percussion, oh dear me, he made a grab for the castanets. Now, I am absolutely hopeless on castanets, and I thought, oh Lawrence, not the castanets, but do you know, he played in perfect time to the music. It was fantastic, really. I was in a home in Wath, and when I go into residential homes, and I ask the musicians to do the same, to always go around and introduce yourself to everybody and to find out their names rather than referring to them as love or dear or whatever, but to find out their name, because your name is the most important word in the English language to you. And when somebody remembers your name, you really feel makes you feel really quite good. And occasionally when I go around introducing myself, you'll come to someone who'll sit there and think for a short while and then say, I don't know. Can you imagine what it must be like to actually forget your own name? So that's why I feel it's so important to actually refer to them by name. If you do, they feel they know you and they are much, much more relaxed. And I was doing this, and this little lady had her mother with her. And her mother was, don't bother with her daughter with her, sorry. And she was saying, don't bother with my mother. She hasn't spoken to me in months. You're wasting your time. And so I sort of pulled away and moved on. And then a little later I went up and I said, what's her name? And she said, Eleanor. And I thought, wow. And I turned to her and I said, my name's Helena too. And up to that point, she was just staring into space. No reaction, no nothing. And she turned and she made eye contact and she said, all the best people called Eleanor. Well, daughter couldn't believe her ears. It was incredible. But from those few words, we realised she was Scottish. We started playing some of the Scottish tunes. She sang, she joined in. She even got up to dance. And her daughter said, that's the first time I've seen my mother upright since she moved into this home. We run training sessions every other month for volunteers and carers in residential homes. And this was actually taken in one of the training sessions. And as I said, you can't see very well here, but this little gentleman was sat, slumped in a chair with a walking stick. And I said to some of the people who attended the training course, because I'd taken them along to this session, if you feel like joining in, please do so. And see if you can get some of them up to dance and sing and what have you. And I think this particular volunteer thought she'd find someone in the group who looked as though they would say no. And she was obviously convinced that this little old gentleman would just refuse. Well, let me tell you, he fairly shot out of that chair and he danced around the room. It was just like Rumpelstiltskin. It was fantastic. So appearances can be deceptive. I was walking out of this residential home and the manager came after me and said, I just have to tell you that that woman never makes eye contact. But as you can see, she was making eye contact there with the volunteer on that day, which sometimes it is just those simple little things like making eye contact when you know you've actually got through. Dementia knows no social barriers, there's no statutory funding, and there's no cure. To hear someone speak for the first time for us is mind-blowing, but for them it gives back the self-esteem they need to carry on in their battle against the disease. Being trapped in a lifeless body is inevitably frustrating and humiliating. Music can in such a simple way overcome these feelings of frustration and humiliation. It seems to reach into their very souls. It's the key that unlocks the door behind which a frightened, intimidated, and humiliated person hides. And I'm just going to leave you with one more story. I went into a residential home and everyone was sat in wheelchairs or in bed chairs. And I thought, oh dear, we're obviously not going to get anyone up to dance. But I said to the carer, I said, is there anybody who could weight bear? And she said, well, I think Alice might be able to get up. So we got Alice up and I did my usual just swaying with Alice, and just as I was putting Alice down, the little grey-haired gentleman sat at the side of her, jumped to his feet and took over. And they danced with the most complicated dance steps I've ever seen in my whole life. I was so embarrassed at what I'd been doing. And it transpired that they were gold medal winning championship dancers. They danced all their lives. I know, how embarrassing. And anyway, he carried on dancing with her for the whole of the session. And at the end, he came up to me, tears streaming down his face, and he said, that's the first time I've danced with my wife in 18 years. He said, we'll get her better yet. Now, of course, as we've said, music can't cure dementia. But you know, that afternoon, we gave him hope. And sometimes, all you have left is hope. Thank you.